Should you put a link to GitHub on your resume? That's what we're going to find out in today's topic. Hey everyone, I'm Winston, and welcome to my channel. On this channel, I plan to talk about topics related to software engineering. So if you want to get into the industry, or you just want to become a better software engineer, in particular I do Ruby on Rails programming, go ahead and hit the subscribe button for more content like this. And if you're interested in today's topic, which is going to be about GitHub links on resumes, go ahead and also give this video a like. So, as somebody myself who's been professionally writing code for several years now in this industry, I know exactly how hard it is to get started. You're in that space where you may not have a whole long track record on your resume, not a whole lot of professional projects to talk about, but you want to demonstrate your level of experience and your knowledge and expertise. And that can be really difficult to do because writing software code is very nuanced, and there's different stylistic things that you're doing in your code, and there's varying degrees of knowledge. And as somebody who's interviewing you, it's very difficult to assess that, especially when you're looking at multiple candidates. Sure, you could list certain bullet points on your resume, but could you actually do the coding? What are your true capabilities? So, in those early days, it's very difficult to kind of demonstrate that. And I think something that a lot of software developers do, especially when they're starting out, is they like to have a GitHub link on their resume. And thinking is that the person potentially interviewing you is going to go to your GitHub, and they're going to see all the great projects that you've worked on and the great things that you've done. They're going to really understand you and your skill level of where you're at. But as somebody who's been on the interviewing side of things, I have seen this backfire a few times. So what are some things that could go wrong if you put your GitHub link on your resume? One of the things that could happen is that the interviewer might go there and your list of GitHub projects may not be as impressive as you think they are. So I've been on a case before where I'm working with a software development team. They're looking to add a new team member, and they go to the candidate's GitHub link because it's on the resume. Initially, it's kind of exciting because you see that there and you think, okay, this person has something tangible that we could look at and evaluate, and we'll get a sense of how they code. But once you get there, you find out that the person is actually not quite to the level of advancement that you need for the job. And one way that this often happens, where you encounter this disappointment, is that some of the newer programmers with a lower level of experience, where they're kind of in that junior level, but maybe they could be a mid-level developer, they'll have a lot of student work type of projects on their GitHub. They might have things that are like projects that they did inside of a coding boot camp, or they might have experimental projects that are unfinished. They might have some things that demonstrate good knowledge base, like such as something with Ruby on Rails. Like I've seen somebody have a demonstration of the model view controller and even a video accompanying that. But overall, that's kind of basic stuff and doesn't really show off enterprise scale problems, which might be needed for a more corporate environment. And then on top of that, if your GitHub projects are kind of old, then they might be a little bit outdated too, and that's not really impressive to look at. Another problem with GitHub is that GitHub repos tend to get very cluttered. So every time that you fork a project, just because you're interested in exploring a code base, or maybe you want to submit a pull request because you found a bug inside of a more popular open source package, I mean, that's all good stuff. but it's not really your best code, or not something that you might want to showcase. And therefore, like somebody who goes on to GitHub and then they see a really crowded resume, they might see a really crowded list of GitHub repositories. They may not know what to focus on, and they may not know which projects are very important to you. And on top of that, having a GitHub link could also hurt more senior level developers as well. So most developers are writing software that goes into a private repository, whether that's Bitbucket or GitLab or GitHub. They're writing private code that isn't going to be shared publicly. A few people, they probably do open source development, but most developers, they don't contribute a whole lot to open source, and they're probably they're mostly writing things that are going to be used by some company and never see the light of day outside of that company. And then so in that case, as a developer, they usually don't have a whole lot to show on their GitHub. So if you don't have your best work on your GitHub, why show it at all? In this case, I think maybe less is more. So if you do want to showcase your best work, I think that's generally a good idea, but maybe there's a better way to do it other than just putting a general link at the top of your resume. Why not do something else, like have a project section, and if there are any meaningful projects to you that you're working on, or code that you have specifically set aside that you want to talk about during an interview at a new company, why not link to that one project or that two projects directly, and then bring it up during the interview, and then you could look at the code together and more closely scrutinize it. And I have a personal anecdote about this. So a number of years ago, when I was interviewing for my first full-time Ruby on Rails developer job, I wanted to talk about some code samples that I did that kind of came up during the interview. So what are some things that you've worked on? And I didn't have a whole lot of official resume experience yet. And I said, well, a project that I did in the recent months is I built this Ruby gem that actually has been used by a few other people in the finance industry. It interfaces a particular API. So I brought that up during the interview. I said, let's go look at the code. And then so we brought it up, and we downloaded it onto that person's computer, and we ran the tests. Everything ran fine, and I was able to walk through the actual code and basic thought process of how I basically architected it and put it together. And by the end of that interview, the interviewer said, well, it looks like you're a Ruby developer. And that was a pretty validating feeling, because I didn't have a full-time role yet as a Ruby developer, and that was my first-time role that I got. So another thing that's kind of important too, if you're going to do that with the particular project thing that you want to talk about, is to also have a very well-written README file, so that any potential interviewers, if they do look at your code, they know exactly what they're looking for, what the important parts are. Maybe in the README you could include a general overview of the architecture, and some instructions on how to download it and run it, at least the test suite if you have one. And then that will give them an opportunity to kind of evaluate your code and your style, and you kind of have some control over the interview like that. You know, I think it's a lot better to talk about some actual code that you've written and you're working on, or that's being used out there in the field or in the open source community, rather than, you know, just being given some logic puzzles inside of an interview and kind of struggling with that, because that's really difficult to do as well on the fly. So what are your thoughts on this tip? Do you have any ideas to add? Or maybe you have a story about whether a GitHub link was helpful to you in your interview, whether you were able to talk about some live code, or maybe it hurt you in an interview and you lost a potential job that way because they didn't think that you were as advanced as you really are. Go ahead and write that story in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think. And if you enjoyed this little tech interviewing tip and you want me to make more content like this, go ahead and hit that like button. And don't forget to subscribe my channel. I'll see you in the next video.